It was the kind of evening that begged to be perfect. Clear skies, warm breeze, laughter bubbling up from every corner of the yard. The neighborhood had outdone itself with lanterns strung through tree branches, the scent of grilled meat hanging heavy in the air, and the clinking of wine glasses echoing across fences. Everyone was smiling. Everyone, that is, except Jack. He was manning the grill, as always, quiet, competent, unnoticed. That was Jack's role. That was Jack. My husband. My pushover. My safety net. My afterthought. I stood by the patio table, a glass of rosé in one hand, my other gesturing wildly as I told a story that had the group in stitches. Tina laughed the loudest, tipping her head back dramatically, and someone else added a punchline about Jack the house husband. It was all in good fun, I thought. After all, I was the life of the party. I always was. That was the role I played, and I'd grown addicted to the spotlight like it was oxygen. When someone mentioned how lucky I was to have a man who knew his place, I joined in with a joke about how Jack would probably walk barefoot across glass if I asked him nicely enough. They laughed. I laughed. And for a few seconds, I felt powerful, beautiful, irreplaceable. Until the silence. Not the kind of silence that comes when people run out of things to say. This one was heavier, like the music stopped without warning, like someone pulled the plug on the night itself. I turned and saw him. Jack stood just behind the group, still wearing the Kiss the Cook apron someone had gifted us years ago. But he wasn't smiling. His hands were empty. His eyes met mine, steady, quiet, unreadable. I saw the flicker of something in them I hadn't seen in years, maybe never. It wasn't anger exactly. It was beyond that. It was clarity. "We need to talk," he said. I blinked. "Now?" "Yes." I followed him, heart beating just a bit faster, not from guilt, not yet, but from the sudden shift in energy. The music resumed behind us. People returned to their drinks and stories, but I knew they were watching. They always did. We walked down the driveway, past the line of parked cars, to the quiet of the side yard. The moonlight cast long shadows, and Jack stood in one, his face calm in a way that made my stomach twist. "I'm done, Lisa," he said. His voice wasn't raised. No bitterness, no dramatics, just a simple sentence that hit me like a thunderclap. "Done?" I laughed nervously, glancing back toward the party. "With what? The grilling?" "No. With you. With this. With being treated like I'm less than." My smile dropped. "Jack, come on. You're being dramatic. It was just—" "No," he interrupted, eyes steady. "It wasn't just tonight. It's every night. Every joke. Every look. Every time you made me feel like a footnote in your life. I kept hoping you'd see me. But now I know. You never will." I stared at him. For the first time, I didn't have anything to say. Not a snarky comeback. Not a guilt trip apology. Not even a lie to soften the moment. There was nothing in my arsenal that worked on this version of Jack. "You're leaving?" I finally managed. "I already packed your things. They'll be on the porch. I changed the locks. Don't come back." "Jack?" He turned and walked away. Not with anger, not with a dramatic slam of a door, but with the finality of someone who had let go a long time ago and had only just now given himself permission to act on it. I stood frozen. People from the party watched with wide eyes, whispering behind raised glasses. Tina tried to catch my eye, but I looked away. My legs moved on their own, carrying me down the sidewalk and toward home, our home, except it no longer felt like mine. When I got there, the porch light was on. A couple of suitcases and 2 boxes were lined up neatly, not a thing out of place. Jack wasn't in sight, not even behind the curtains. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again, harder this time, tears threatening to break free. "Jack, please," I said to the door. "Can we just talk about this?" I heard a movement inside, then his voice, calm but cold. "If you don't leave, I'm calling the police." I gasped, stepping back. "Are you serious?" No answer. The porch light buzzed softly above me. a harsh contrast to the pounding of blood in my ears. I grabbed the suitcases with shaking hands and made my way down the street. The laughter from the party still floated through the air, now distant and distorted, like a cruel echo of the life I'd just lost. I didn't know where I was going. I just walked, dragging pieces of my life behind me on wheels. Eventually, I sat on a bench at the park near the school, dialed my dad, and tried to keep my voice steady as I told him I needed a ride. He didn't ask many questions. He didn't have to. When he arrived and saw me like that, makeup smeared, knees drawn to my chest, Jack's wedding ring still glinting from my finger, he sighed like a man who knew this moment had been coming for a long time. We drove in silence. That night, I stared at the ceiling in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by posters from high school and stuffed animals I used to sleep with. I felt 17 again, small, helpless, alone. Only this time it was all my fault. Before everything fell apart, before the party, the porch, the packed boxes, I used to believe our love story was something special. We met in college. Jack was the quiet guy in the corner of the library, always scribbling in a notebook or lost in a novel. I was the loud one in the study group, the girl who could light up a room without even trying. When our eyes met for the first time, it felt like something out of a rom-com. Me, the storm, and him, the calm, right in the center of it. Jack didn't sweep me off my feet with grand gestures. Instead, he made me feel safe, seen. In a world full of noise and chaos, he was the only one who ever made me feel grounded. He didn't chase after me like the other guys. He waited. Patient. Steady. And somehow, that made me want him more. I loved how he looked at me, like I was something rare, something worth cherishing. I used to brag about how he adored me, how he'd walk across campus in the rain just to bring me a sandwich because I had back-to-back lectures, how he remembered the name of every childhood pet I'd ever had, how he listened. Really listened. He was always the first to show up, the last to leave. I told my friends that Jack was the kind of man you married, and I meant it. So I married him. I was 21, still unsure of what I wanted to do with my life. Jack had just started his first job as a junior analyst at a local firm, and I was still trying to finish school. He proposed during a picnic under a tree on campus. The ring wasn't flashy. Neither was the proposal. But when he asked, I didn't hesitate. I saw a future with him. One filled with quiet mornings, shared coffees, love notes on the fridge, Sunday crossword puzzles, and sleepy conversations in bed. At first, everything felt easy. We moved into a small apartment on the edge of town. Modest, but ours. Jack worked long hours, and I stayed home to finish school. He never complained when money was tight, never said a word when I dropped out a semester later, saying I needed a break. He only nodded, told me to take my time, and made it work. But somewhere in that comfort, I started to change. Maybe it was the boredom, or the fact that the real world didn't feel like the dream I'd imagined. I spent my days scrolling social media, comparing my life to people who looked prettier, richer, more fulfilled. They were traveling, dining out, glowing in curated photos, while I was stuck folding laundry and reheating leftovers. My life began to feel small. I began to feel small. Jack was doing well, moving up at work, becoming more respected in his field. But he never bragged, never rubbed it in. He just kept coming home with flowers or takeout or surprise books he thought I'd like. And for a while, I pretended that was enough. But I missed the excitement, the rush, the attention. And that's when I started going out more. First with old friends from college, then with new ones I met at the gym or the coffee shop. They were wild, untethered, full of energy. They drank too much, laughed too loudly, and said all the things I hadn't realized I wanted to hear. That I was too young to settle, that Jack was holding me back, that I deserved more. At first, I defended him. I told them he was good to me, that he loved me deeply. But over time, it became easier to join in the jokes, to roll my eyes at his texts, to laugh when someone called him whipped. It felt like rebellion, like freedom. To laugh when someone called him whipped. It felt like rebellion, like freedom. I didn't realize I was laughing my way toward destruction. Jack noticed. Of course he did. He wasn't stupid. He just didn't confront me. He started coming home later, throwing himself into work. He was still kind, still thoughtful, still trying, but I was slipping further away. Looking back, I can see all the cracks forming. The missed dinners, the cold silences, the way we stopped touching each other, even in passing. But I told myself it was fine, that Jack would always be there, that he'd never leave, because Jack was the kind of man who didn't believe in quitting. I never imagined he'd be the one to walk away, but I had given him every reason to. And now, lying in my childhood bed surrounded by dusty memories and the soft whir of a ceiling fan, I finally understood something terrifying. Jack had loved me better than I ever loved myself, and instead of holding on to that love, I'd mocked it, drained it, disrespected it until there was nothing left but silence. Now, I had that silence all to myself. People always say hindsight is 20/20, but I think it's something worse. Like staring into a mirror after you've already broken it, trying to piece together what your face used to look like. After Jack left, all I could do was retrace steps I hadn't even noticed taking. The truth is, I was blind, willfully so. I didn't want to see the damage I was causing, the eye rolls, the sarcasm, the dismissals, the little humiliations I tossed out in front of others like confetti. I had convinced myself they didn't matter, but they did. They mattered to Jack, and they slowly unraveled him. He was never one for grand declarations or angry outbursts. Jack's pain didn't come with slamming doors or cruel words. It came in quiet withdrawals, shorter conversations, longer days at work. He started forgetting the small things he used to do, like leaving a cup of coffee for me by the nightstand or texting me good morning. At the time, I thought he was growing cold, losing interest. But now I see it for what it was: resignation. He was pulling back piece by piece, trying to protect what was left of himself. I didn't see it, or maybe I did, and I just didn't care enough to look closer. My world had shifted, and I had let the wrong voices become my guides. Tina, Alyssa, the whole crew of women who cheered me on as I belittled the only man who ever really saw me. They told me I deserved better, that I was too vibrant for someone so mild. They fed my ego like it was starving, and I mistook their validation for wisdom. But now, sitting in my parents' home, jobless, directionless, abandoned by those same friends, I finally understand what Jack was trying to do all along. He wasn't trying to control me. He wasn't trying to trap me in a quiet life. He was trying to build a life with me, one that had safety, stability, something real. I mistook his steadiness for weakness, his love for submission, his loyalty for lack of ambition. But he was never weak. He just believed in us. I remember the little moments now with aching clarity, like the time he stayed up all night helping me put together a birthday slideshow for my dad, even though he had a huge presentation the next morning. Or the time he drove an hour out of his way to find a bakery that sold the exact cake I craved when I was feeling down. I didn't say thank you for those things. I expected them, as if kindness from a partner was something I was owed, not something given freely from love. When he told me it was over, something in his voice shifted. It wasn't angry. It was empty. That's what broke me. Not the words, but the finality. Jack had spent years loving me through every season, through every high and low, through every selfish choice I made. But love doesn't survive in a vacuum. You have to give it back. And I hadn't, not for a long time. The days since have been a blur of shame and longing. I tried calling him a dozen times that first week. The phone would ring, sometimes go to voicemail. Other times it was just silence. I left messages, long, tearful apologies, promises to change, pleas for another chance. But deep down I knew I had exhausted every last bit of grace Jack had. He had loved me until it hurt too much to keep trying. I even wrote him a letter. Not the kind of text message you delete and rewrite 100 times, but an actual, handwritten letter. 5 pages, ink smudged by tears. I told him everything. How I had let the wrong people shape my view of love. How I had resented him for things that were never his fault. How I had traded substance for sparkle and didn't realize I'd lost the best thing I ever had. I never got a response. But I hope he read it. As for my friends, they've vanished. Not one of them has called to check in. Not one has offered a couch or a drink or even a comforting word. Tina moved on to some new girl in our circle, someone she can groom and push around like she did with me. The rest? They're posting photos with each other, captioned with cliches like ride or die and loyalty is everything. It's funny. Loyalty was everything, and Jack had it. I just didn't. The worst part is running into people from our neighborhood. The looks they give me, some sympathetic, some judgmental, all awkward. I don't blame them. I was the one who made our love into a public joke. I was the one who let a party turn into a humiliation. What do you say to someone who watched your marriage implode between sips of sangria? My mother tries to be supportive. She doesn't say, I told you so, but I know she could. She had always liked Jack, always said he was a real man, quiet strength, the kind that doesn't need to shout to be heard. My father doesn't say much. He's old school. I think he believes I made my bed and now I should lie in it. Maybe he's right. And yet, I'm not entirely hopeless. Somewhere deep inside, under the guilt and the shame, I feel the flicker of something else, accountability. I've started therapy, twice a week. It's brutal. Looking in the mirror of your own choices is like peeling back layers of skin. But I'm trying. For the first time in a long time, I'm not blaming Jack, or my friends, or the world. I'm just trying to own it. Because I think that's the only way I'll survive this, to stop running and start rebuilding. Jack might never come back. And I'm starting to accept that. But maybe, just maybe, I can become the kind of woman who would have deserved him. It's too late for us, but maybe not too late for me. The silence of Jack's absence was the loudest sound I had ever known. At night, the guest room in my parents' house creaked with a loneliness that felt like punishment. I used to sleep through storms, with Jack's arm wrapped around me, his steady breathing grounding me like roots to the earth. Now, I lay awake counting the seconds between thoughts, hoping the ache in my chest would dull just enough to let me sleep. But it never did. That room, once meant for visiting relatives, had become a tomb of reflection, and every time I closed my eyes, I was haunted, not by nightmares, but by memories. There was no closet full of his clothes to cling to, no items left behind to pretend he still existed in my life. Jack had erased me efficiently, coldly. The framed photos were gone from the walls. The toothbrush he kept next to mine vanished. It was like he had anticipated the finality of it long before I did, quietly preparing for a life without me. That realization struck harder than any insult ever could. It meant he'd been hurting long before the moment he stood up at the party. I'd just been too selfish to notice. Everywhere I turned, there was a reminder of what I had thrown away. At the grocery store, I saw a brand of pasta Jack loved and had to fight back tears in the middle of aisle 6. I stopped watching certain shows because they reminded me of our Sunday night routines. I couldn't even scroll through social media without running into the ghosts of our life. Old anniversary posts, couple photos, and captions full of promises I had broken. The job hunt was brutal. No one wants to hire a 24-year-old with no recent experience, a resume full of blank space, and a reputation that whispered through a neighborhood like wildfire. I walked into interviews with stiff smiles and desperate eyes, but most ended with polite rejection emails, when they even bothered to reply. Eventually, my father pulled some strings to get me a receptionist job at a logistics company on the outskirts of town. It was dull, repetitive, and far beneath the life I once imagined for myself. But it was something. The first day I walked into that office, a wave of shame nearly knocked me over. I had once mocked people who took jobs like that, had joked with Tina about settling for mediocrity. And now here I was, settled, humbled, and grateful for the chance to answer phones and file paperwork. The irony tasted bitter, but it was necessary. This wasn't punishment, it was education, and I was long overdue for it. In between filing folders and making copies, I started writing again. Not blog posts or Instagram captions, but journal entries. Long, messy pages of raw reflection. It started as a way to cope, but over time, it became something more. A confession to myself. I wrote about the first time Jack made me laugh so hard I cried, about the way he used to hum while folding laundry, about the moment I realized I'd stopped looking at him with love and started looking at him with contempt. I didn't write to win him back. I wrote to understand how I had gotten here, to map out the road from love to loss. Therapy helped too, even when I hated it. My therapist, Dana, didn't coddle me. She didn't let me play the victim. She held up a mirror and forced me to look. We talked about my need for validation, my obsession with control, my fear of being ordinary. Slowly, painfully, the layers began to peel back. I started to see how much of my identity had been built on performance, on being the fun one, the admired one, the one everyone envied. I had been so afraid of disappearing that I lost sight of what truly mattered: connection, empathy, respect. My parents were a strange mix of supportive and distant. My mother offered tea and long silences, letting me talk when I needed to, but never prying. My father kept his emotions locked tight, but I caught him watching me sometimes with a look I couldn't quite read. Disappointment? Pity? Maybe both. But they gave me a roof, and for now that was enough. One evening, about a month after the party, I saw Jack. Not in person, but on someone's Instagram story. He was at a local art walk, standing beside a woman I didn't recognize. They weren't touching or posing, just laughing, and he looked happy, really happy. That smile, soft, genuine, unburdened, gutted me. I dropped my phone and sobbed for the first time in weeks. Not because I thought he had moved on, but because I finally understood he had been ready to move on. I was the one still clinging to the past, holding on to the belief that maybe he'd come back, that maybe I could fix it. But there was no going back, only forward. So I kept writing. I kept working. I kept breathing through the loneliness. I turned down invitations from my old circle, and slowly, I started building a new one. People who didn't know me as the girl who mocked her husband, but as someone who was trying. At work, a quiet woman named Julia invited me to lunch. We weren't instant best friends, but she listened. That was enough. I began volunteering on weekends at a women's shelter, folding clothes and sorting donations. It was humbling, necessary work, and it reminded me that I wasn't the only one trying to climb out of the ruins. The pain didn't vanish. There were still nights I cried myself to sleep, still days I caught myself drafting texts I'd never send. But they became fewer, lighter. Healing didn't look like a clean break, it looked like a slow thaw. Jack was gone, and maybe he would never look back. But I was still here, still standing in the wreckage. And brick by brick, I was learning how to build again, not to win anyone back, but to become someone worth being. The days that followed Jack's departure stretched like an endless void, heavy with the weight of absence. The house, once filled with the soft clatter of routine and Jack's quiet humming as he prepared coffee, now echoed with nothing but silence. I stayed at my parents' place, unsure how to face the world outside, or even myself. I kept rereading the last text he ever sent me. Just one line, polite and emotionless. "Your things are ready. I hope you find what you're looking for." Each word sliced deeper than the last. My parents, confused but supportive, didn't pry, though the disappointment in my father's eyes said enough. I spent most days lying awake, staring at the ceiling, haunted by memories of laughter I used to mock, kindness I used to scoff at, love I used to dismiss. The grief didn't come in sobs. It came in waves of realization, every small detail a reminder of what I'd shattered. I began journaling, not to wallow, but to make sense of the wreckage. It started as angry rants, at myself, at Jack, at the world, but slowly morphed into honest confessions. I admitted my cruelty, my apathy, my failure to appreciate a man who had done nothing but love me. Tina and the others, the friends I'd once trusted, vanished like smoke. They didn't text, didn't call. I saw pictures of them still going out, still laughing, as if my absence meant nothing. It stung, but it was also freeing. Their silence taught me what I never understood while Jack was still around. True friendship doesn't celebrate your worst moments. Alone, I applied for jobs, desperate to claw back some control over my life. Eventually, with my father's help, I landed a part-time position at a hardware store. Not glamorous, not ideal, but honest. I felt foreign there, unsure of how to interact without putting on the performance I had perfected over the years. I didn't know how to be real without an audience. My coworkers were kind, though distant, sensing perhaps the storm that clung to me like a second skin. In the evenings, I took long walks just to avoid being still. Sometimes I would walk by the old house, hoping to catch a glimpse of Jack's silhouette in the window. I never did. Word through a former neighbor, one who never joined in the mockery, was that Jack had changed too. He'd joined a hiking club, taken up photography, and was even laughing more. That image, Jack smiling without me, was unbearable, yet deserved. I'd wished for him to be stronger, to stand up for himself, and he had. Only it came at the cost of us. Therapy became my sanctuary. My therapist didn't coddle me, didn't tell me what I wanted to hear. She asked hard questions. Why did I need to be adored to feel worthy? Why did kindness make me uncomfortable? Why did I destroy the only person who gave me unconditional love? It was there, in that sterile room with its box of tissues always within reach, that I began to unpack the rot inside me. I was not a villain without cause. I was a broken girl who'd never learned how to be loved without testing it to destruction. And Jack? He had finally passed the test, not by staying, but by leaving. The irony was cruel. I began writing again, not just in a journal, but stories. Stories about women like me, flawed, lost, searching. It became my therapy, my redemption. Sometimes I imagined Jack reading them, understanding how deeply I regretted everything. But I never sent them. He didn't owe me closure. He had already given me everything. All I could do was honor it by becoming someone worthy of that kind of love, even if it came from someone else in the distant future. As autumn painted the city in reds and golds, I started to feel breath return to my lungs. Not all the way, but enough to whisper, I'm still here. I can still change. Winter came early that year, and with it a deeper stillness that wrapped around everything like frost on glass. Sharp, quiet, inescapable. I moved into a small apartment above a bakery. A modest one-bedroom with peeling paint and creaky floors, but it was mine. For the first time in years, I lived alone, truly alone. Not just without Jack, but without the noise of constant validation. Without the toxic friendships that once fed my ego like cheap candy. I kept my mornings simple. Coffee from the cafe downstairs, a brief walk around the block, then work at the hardware store, where I was slowly becoming part of the wallpaper. Visible, but not really seen. And I liked it that way. The anonymity, the routine, the lack of drama. It gave me room to breathe, to think, to exist without trying to perform. But even in the quiet, Jack haunted everything. He was in the way I folded laundry with care, remembering how he used to press his shirts meticulously. He was in the way I caught myself humming his favorite tune under my breath while stocking shelves. I saw him in strangers sometimes, his posture, his laugh, even the tilt of a head that made my stomach drop with hope before reality returned. One day, I ran into his old coworker while grocery shopping. He didn't mention Jack, but I could see recognition in his eyes, and worse, pity. That moment crushed me more than any cruel word ever could. I went home and cried for the first time in weeks, not just tears of sadness, but of shame, regret, and a new kind of grief. The grief for the woman I could have been if I had loved better. Therapy sessions grew heavier as I peeled back more layers of myself, exposing the jagged roots of my need to control, to dominate, to be admired at all costs. I began to understand my cruelty not as power, but as a defense mechanism, a way to preempt abandonment by always being the one to push away first. But Jack hadn't abandoned me. He had simply chosen peace over war, dignity over dysfunction. And that made him braver than I'd ever been. I started writing again, with purpose. Essays, stories, anonymous blog posts. Each one a stitched confession offered to a faceless audience, not for attention, but for healing. My writing gained a small following, mostly women who saw themselves in my words. They wrote back with stories of their own, of love lost, of self-sabotage, of redemption. For the first time, I felt connection without performance. One night, deep in the cold of December, I received a letter. Not an email, but a real letter, with my name written in Jack's unmistakable hand. My hands trembled as I opened it. It was brief, just a few paragraphs, but every word landed like thunder. He wrote that he had read one of my blog posts, anonymously shared by a mutual acquaintance. He didn't say whether it moved him or hurt him. He didn't ask for forgiveness or offer it. Instead, he said, "I hope you're finding what you needed. I hope the silence taught you what my words never could." That was it. A single note that shattered and rebuilt me in one breath. I stared at it for hours, folded it carefully, and placed it in the drawer beside my bed. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. That letter wasn't an invitation. It was closure. The final page of a chapter that had already ended. I spent Christmas alone, by choice, curled under a blanket with a mug of cocoa and a notebook. I wrote stories of forgiveness, of quiet strength, of men like Jack and women like who I was, slowly transforming into women like who I hoped to be. I wasn't healed yet, not fully, but I was becoming. And sometimes, becoming is all you can ask for. Spring arrived like a slow exhale, bringing with it the scent of rain-soaked earth and blooming chances. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I no longer dreaded waking up to my own life. The world outside began to mirror something shifting inside me, subtle, fragile, but real. I kept my job at the hardware store, but started taking evening classes at the local community center, brushing up on writing, psychology, and, almost impulsively, conflict resolution. It wasn't about Jack anymore. It was about learning who I was when I wasn't being cruel, when I wasn't performing, when I was just me. The therapy helped. I learned to stop treating vulnerability like a disease and started embracing the weight of my own accountability without letting it bury me. My parents remained kind but distant. They had supported me, yes, but something in our relationship had been strained since they saw how badly I had failed. And I couldn't blame them. My mother, once proud of my sharp wit, now looked at me with eyes that hoped for softness instead. Slowly, we began to mend, though not through grand gestures, just small moments, sharing tea in the kitchen, helping her plant tomatoes in the backyard, sitting beside each other in silence when there was nothing to say. Meanwhile, the online community I'd stumbled into through my anonymous writing continued to grow, and a woman named Claire, who said my posts had helped her leave a toxic marriage, reached out and asked if I'd speak on a small podcast. At first, I laughed at the idea of anyone wanting my voice after the damage I'd caused. But then I said yes. My voice shook, my heart pounded, but I spoke. I told my story, unvarnished, messy, filled with all the things I once buried under sarcasm and laughter, at someone else's expense. And something surprising happened. People responded with kindness, not because they approved of what I had done, but because they understood the wreckage of self-betrayal and the courage it took to admit it. From there, doors opened. Invitations to write, to speak, to help facilitate small workshops about emotional growth and recognizing toxic patterns, things I had once embodied and now studied like a survivor decoding a foreign language. Jack remained distant, a name I didn't speak aloud anymore, but he hovered in my mind like the outline of a painting I'd once ruined. He never wrote again. I never expected him to. But I often thought about what he was doing, who he had become without me, and if the silence had healed him the way it had forced me to grow. One day, I passed by the neighborhood we once lived in. By accident or fate, I'm still unsure, and saw him. He was walking with a woman I didn't recognize, laughing easily, his posture relaxed. He looked good. He looked free. I didn't approach. I just watched from my car, heart aching, not with regret anymore, but with understanding. He had rebuilt, and so had I, each of us on opposite shores of the same storm. That night, I wrote him a letter I never intended to send. In it, I thanked him, not for the pain, but for the courage he showed when I couldn't, for the silent boundaries that finally taught me what respect meant. I burned it afterward, letting the flame devour the last pieces of a chapter already closed. I was no longer the villain in my own life. I was something else now. Still flawed, still figuring it out, but no longer hiding behind cruelty and denial. I had learned to stand still in the wreckage and build something new, brick by honest brick. The days that followed were carved out of routine, but laced with the unfamiliar peace of a house no longer echoing with unspoken resentment. Jack had moved into a small apartment across town, the kind with creaky floors and mismatched appliances, but he found solace in its simplicity. For the first time in years, he wasn't walking on emotional eggshells. He began to rediscover small pleasures, cooking for one, reading late into the night without being mocked for it, or going on long walks, her social media accounts. The constant comparisons, the endless scrolling of curated lives, had lost their shine. The friends who once filled her weekends with drinks and gossip had disappeared overnight. Tina never reached out, neither did the others. In some strange way, their silence was a gift. It forced Lisa to rebuild, not with borrowed confidence or fake flattery, but with something real. She started journaling, a habit recommended by her therapist, and found solace in writing things she could never say aloud: regrets, apologies, even letters to Jack she never intended to send. What hurt most wasn't the loss of Jack's affection, but the loss of the person she had been with him. The version of herself that once smiled for no reason, that danced barefoot in their kitchen, that felt safe. That woman had vanished long before the final neighborhood party. Lisa had suffocated her beneath years of eye rolls, snide remarks, and cruel jokes made for applause. Now, all that remained was the echo of that loss, and the question, could she ever become someone she respected again? One Saturday, months into her new routine, she decided to take a walk through her old neighborhood. She knew it was risky, that she might see someone from before, maybe even Jack. But something in her chest longed to trace the path of her old life. The streets hadn't changed. The same kids played in the yards. The same houses stood, calm and indifferent. She paused at the park, sitting on a bench under the same tree where she had once waited for her dad to pick her up, broken and humiliated. Now she watched couples pass, dogs chase balls, families laugh. She didn't belong to any of them anymore. Then she saw her. An old acquaintance, Mallory, someone Tina had always dismissed. Lisa had barely spoken to her during the years of parties and drinks, but Mallory recognized her instantly. There was no mockery in her gaze, no triumph, only a calm curiosity. They spoke briefly. Mallory, surprisingly warm, shared updates from the neighborhood. That Jack looked happy, healthier, that he didn't seem interested in anyone romantically despite the sudden attention from many of the same women who once laughed at him. Lisa laughed too, bitterly, softly. Of course they were crying now. They only wanted what they couldn't break. But something in Mallory's tone, the quiet respect, reminded Lisa that not everyone saw her as irredeemable. That perhaps, if she kept walking this path, she might find something like forgiveness, not from others, but from herself. She returned home that evening with a strange new feeling, resolve. She couldn't undo the past, couldn't make Jack love her again, or erase the cruelty she'd used like armor. But she could build something new. Her savings from the job were growing slowly. She had found a cheap apartment across town, small but hers. Her therapist called it a milestone. Lisa called it survival. She moved in with 2 boxes and a mattress. No furniture, no fanfare. But when she stood in the empty space and looked around, she smiled for the first time in months. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. Jack would never come back. She had accepted that now. Even if he did, she wouldn't take him back, because she finally understood that love wasn't about begging someone to fill your empty spaces. It was about showing up, fully, for yourself first. And she was just beginning to learn how. The quiet came first, not the lonely kind that once gnawed at Lisa during sleepless nights in her parents' house, but the soft kind, a stillness that wrapped itself around her new apartment like a quilt. The mornings began with coffee brewed in silence, sunlight streaking across the bare floor, and her own breath echoing in the stillness. No one else's footsteps, no frantic texts, no judgmental stares, just her. It had been a year since Jack left, a year since she stood in the middle of that party, drunk on laughter that turned into shame, only to hear her husband tell her, in front of everyone, that he was done, and he had meant it. The secondation, now, standing on her tiny balcony with a chipped mug in hand, Lisa could finally admit something to herself. Not with bitterness, not with self-pity, just honesty. He was right to leave. But what he didn't take with him was her capacity to grow. She had found a new job by then, a full-time position at a small publishing company downtown. It didn't pay much more than the last one, but it gave her purpose. Every morning she dressed with care, walked to the train with her head high, and reminded herself, daily if needed, that she was not the woman who laughed at her husband's devotion anymore. She wasn't the woman who needed to be the center of every room, who traded kindness for control. That woman had been buried under layers of insecurity, and the slow, painful process of digging her out had made Lisa stronger than she'd ever been. Therapy was still part of her life, not weekly now, but enough to keep her anchored. Dr. Faber had once said, "Healing doesn't come with applause, Lisa. It comes with choices you make when no one's watching." That line stuck. So every time Lisa turned down an invitation to join old habits, every time she stopped herself from oversharing to be liked, every time she told the truth, even when it hurt, those were her quiet victories. One evening, she received a letter in the mail, handwritten, addressed in Jack's neat print. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside was a single page. No declarations, no nostalgia, just closure. "Lisa, I hope you're doing well. I wanted to write not because I expect anything from you, but because I owe you this much. I see now that walking away wasn't just about protecting myself. It was about giving you the space to see who you are when no one's handing you a mirror. I hope you're proud of her. I am, from a distance. We were wrong for each other, but that doesn't mean we were meaningless. I wish you peace, Jack." She read the letter 3 times before setting it gently on the table. No tears came, just warmth, like the final note in a song that had haunted her for too long. In the months that followed, she built a quiet life. She furnished her apartment slowly. A second-hand couch, shelves filled with books, thrifted art that made her smile. Her friendships were fewer, but real. She started volunteering at a local shelter, offering help to women who had lost their voices like she once had. She shared her story carefully, never as a victim, but as someone who had once hurt others and learned the hard way how to stop. Sometimes, when she walked through her neighborhood or sipped coffee on a bench downtown, she'd catch glimpses of couples and wonder about Jack, where he was, whether he'd moved on, if he was happy. And every time, she hoped he was. Not because she wanted him back, but because she finally loved herself enough to let him go without resentment. One afternoon, Lisa found herself standing in front of the house they once shared. It had been sold. The new owners had painted the shutters blue and planted flowers along the front walkway. A child's bicycle leaned against the porch. Life had moved on, and so had she. She stayed there for just a moment, whispered goodbye, and walked away. That night, curled up with a book and the hum of the city outside her window, Lisa smiled to herself. She had lost everything, and in doing so, found herself. This was her quiet goodbye, and her beginning. Thank you for listening. If this story resonated with you, let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you enjoyed Lisa's journey, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to Kindle Stories for more powerful human narratives that matter.